Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of our Thrive RX series, Healing the Healer, Beyond Burnout Towards Flourishing. I'm Sanj Katyal, and with us again, we've got Jordan Feingold, Paul Frampus, and Keaton Kulkarni. Last time in episode 1, Jordan did a great job of walking us through what exactly positive psychology is as a field and how it can help us as physicians live better lives. Before we get into this week's theme and question, let's just quickly reintroduce ourselves. Jordan?
Sure. My name is Jordan Feingold. I am currently a fourth-year medical student. I am going to be a psychiatrist. I start my training in the fall, and I have my master's degree in applied positive psychology, the science of human flourishing, and I'm delighted to be here with you.
Great. Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Frampus. I'm a practicing emergency physician. I'm the medical director of patient safety and work on system wellness at a large academic medical center in Pennsylvania.
Great. Keaton?
Hi, everybody. I'm Keaton Kulkarni. I'm a practicing clinician researcher, pediatric oncologist, an entrepreneur, investor, and art collector. I'm very thrilled to be part of this initiative.
Great. Okay, how about this week's question? What's the single biggest obstacle to happiness? Okay. And just to recap, we've solicited questions from our physician colleagues and grouped them according to themes over the 4 series that we're talking about. So this is a common question that I get, and I think everybody else as well. Before we get into the common obstacle for happiness, I think we need to back up and talk about the word happiness itself. And this is something that I struggled with, probably about 10 years ago. I was working in clinical operations for a large private radiology startup, and I would visit various hospitals and talk to a lot of physicians. And one thing I noticed was a growing discontent among many physician leaders that I would meet with. And it didn't really matter what specialty or, what state they lived in or whatever. And it really didn't even matter what words you called it, whether it was burnout, moral injury. They were just unhappy, unfulfilled, and not living the lives that they thought they'd be living. And as I thought about my own life back then, I began to wonder why I wasn't happier. And I didn't really even explore the concept of happiness. All I knew is that I had achieved really more than anything I could have ever dreamed of. And, I was married to my best friend. We have 4 healthy kids. I had a great job. And I began to worry that if I couldn't figure out how to get more joy and meaning out of life when things were that good, how was I ever going to really deal with any real adversity when it would inevitably come? Which, by the way, it did. And so I began to study philosophy, ancient wisdom. I eventually became certified in positive psychology, or the science of happiness, as Jordan explained. And I was really searching for an answer to the single question: how can I learn not just to function, but to actually flourish? And that is, I think, a question that many physicians that I've worked with over the past several years have found themselves asking in one form or the other, personally to them. So if you think about the word happiness, and I really try not to use it, but it's so prevalent, it's kind of like mindfulness, right? It's overused and nobody really even knows what it means. But if I ask you, do you want to be happy? The answer is, of course I do, right? But then if I ask, well, what does it mean to be happy? The answer becomes a little less obvious. And that's because most people think of it as a transient emotional state that, varies minute by minute, day by day, right? Yesterday I was happy, or today I'm sad, or I'll be happy next weekend when I'm not on call. And this isn't the type of happiness or a key to the good life that positive psychologists talk about, or what the ancient philosophers like Aristotle and some of the Stoics talked about. the words that they use as human flourishing or a state of optimal living kind of over a long period of time. And I think that's really the key difference. And to me, a simple definition of flourishing, which is the word that I use, or well-being, is really the state of optimal living over a period of time. But it's really more about full realization of our core potential in the service of something bigger than ourselves. That's a very simple definition, but that's one that I guide for myself in my own life and with the physicians that I work with. And, that's a lot different than trying to feel joy or smile all the time or never feel down. You want the slope of your life to be increasing over time, but you're still going to have the ups and downs as it goes. And to me, that's the big difference. So I think the key is to stop chasing happiness and start thinking about flourishing. And that's why Thrive RX, I think, is so valuable, because it's really the only course that can guide us away from happiness to a deeper level of flourishing, our expression of our core potential that's unique, but is really trying to get out in all of us. So
I really like your way of thinking about well-being or flourishing as fulfilling our potential, and as something that's long-term rather than just a state that is transient and that we're looking to chase. And I absolutely agree. I sometimes think of well-being, or what Aristotle called eudaimonia, the good spirit of when our internal strivings align with our external realities. And I actually, now I'm saying this out loud, striving is a loaded term. And so it's not about chasing that state of happiness. I think it's about embracing a mindset of positivity and opening ourselves up to be porous to notice the good things in our lives that are happening, rather than falling subject to that negativity bias that we talked about, that we evolved to have, but really overcoming that and saying, how can I just notice what's good today to find a sense of inner peace, equanimity, tranquility, and happiness is one small fleeting piece of the whole well-being puzzle.
Yeah, I agree, Jordan. I think Sanj, that's a great introduction. I think to the idea. I mean, so many of us constantly feel and believe, or are led to believe, that happiness is momentary. Like, you publish a paper, you get a good return on investment, you get married or whatever, and that's a transient state and it's bound to disappear. But what you're really getting at, and the way I see it, is a deep sort of thinking, or a deep awakening, if you will call it that. And another way, that I have sort of read and found useful is to think of this as a 3-pillar stool. Like, you have gratitude on one end, you have forgiveness on another end, and really have contribution, or a sense of contribution, on the other end. And the three come together to really give you a very deep sense of satisfaction. I don't know what you think about that.
yeah,
I think it's a good thing to think about. I also think that part of what Thrive RX helps with is that I think recalibration that we need as physicians. And this is why it's interesting to talk to communities of physicians, because we share a common personality type and persona of always needing to get to that next goal. Like if we had to be the best of the best in undergrad, and then we waited for that to end, and we got into medical school, and then the residency thing, and then the hard rotation, then to get to the easy rotation, and we just keep clawing away. And if we don't sort of recalibrate and reset and start to appreciate what we have, we fall back to this natural instinct of climbing up to the next thing and seeming like that's when we'll achieve the happiness. But of course, that just gets us to the next rung of the ladder.
Yeah, the goalpost moves further, that's correct. The goalpost keeps moving, and it's like a mirage, you get there and then it's gone another 10 miles ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think one of the good insights of positive psychology for me is understanding these evolutionary traps of the mind, right? The goalpost keeps moving, right? The next level you arrive only to feel unfulfilled, upon your arrival at that destination, right? That's hedonic adaptation. That's the treadmill that we're all on, right? The temporary spike when you make partner or when you get married or, like you said, publish a paper. We quickly return to our baseline. But the reason that we do that, and I'm trying to understand fundamental truths as opposed to behavior modifications.
Mm-hmm.
Because behavior modifications are kind of like trimming the branches of a tree of suffering, but until you get to the root, you really can't affect a real change. And the root cause of all of this is, I think, our evolutionary instinct of our mind's quest for survival, right? So if you think about the human organism as it grew, the limbic system in the reptilian brain basically responds to threats and opportunities, right? Think about look at how a dog behaves. Mm-hmm. It's scouring the floor for food and it's barking at any stranger, right? And then as we grow in society, our prefrontal cortex grows. We grow identities, this sense of ego, who we are, to be able to interact with other identities. But the goal of the mind and the ego is still the same. It's to protect our survival. So we still run around searching for opportunities and threats, right? That's why we chase pleasure and we avoid pain. Everything we do is basically that. If we live in this constant state, as Paul said, without awareness, we kind of default into this climbing to the next thing, right? We're looking for the next opportunity. No matter how much we've achieved, no matter how much money is in our bank account, we're constantly on the search for pleasure and avoidance of pain. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem because there's an intrinsic conflict because our core being, that human organism, wants to flourish. It wants to express its full unique potential in the world, but it's trapped by this protective core of our mind that only cares about survival. It doesn't care how happy we are, how content we are, how peaceful we are, whatever. And I think one of the insights of Thrive RX is to guide us on this exploration of understanding and untangling our core potential from this ego, this mind, this identity, this constant chase. I think we need to just stop chasing, and not only by stopping the chase can we actually start to flourish.
So I want to have a yes and here. So I totally hear you. I do think that understanding the roots is so critically important. And I don't think we're destined to just repeat what our evolutionary, what our evolution has sort of set for us. I think that learning, and I think, Sanj, you completely agree, and we've discussed this, that when we can learn how we evolved and understand these patterns that we're subject to fall into, chase pleasure, avoid pain, that we can unlearn how to do some of those things. And I think this myth of happiness is about this notion that we think that happiness and pleasure are the path to the life well lived. And pleasure or hedonism, it may seem like, like if I could just, have that drink with my friends or get that brand new car and have that, what feels really pleasurable, that's going to lead us to well-being. And what we talk about in our course is that that's really misled. We as human beings are really poor at knowing what's going to give us quote unquote happiness or bring us well-being. We tend to think that it's these big life events, as Paul's saying, when I publish this paper, when I get married, when I, have my kid, I'll be happy then. And we fall into this, I'll be happy when mentality. But really it's the simple things, the small pleasures in life that really give us the greatest well-being, just sitting down and having a meal with our loved ones, having a conversation like this where we could get into the philosophy and hash it out and bring our own perspectives. It's really these small, seemingly just innocuous things that happen to us that really add up to bring the life well lived.
Right. I totally agree. I mean, so would it be reasonable to say that, this is a way of, rewiring your brain to do some deep thought work and, unlearning some of those automatic algorithms. We've got these knee-jerk reactions that, the limbic system kicks in. Your brain perceives a threat and boom, you're unhappy, or you see a possible reward and you race to it and it continues, right? So I don't know what you guys think about that. I mean, you are the psychology experts. So.
I think it goes back to what we were talking about last week too, in that concept of the negative is always screaming and the positive is whispering. And the only way you can hear whispers is to concentrate on the whispers. And I think that concentrating on the positives that we experience each and every day, whether that's in our personal life or our professional life or our professional life of growth, is critically important, because we're always surrounded by a sea of negativism that seems to have the volume turned up compared to the things positive going on in each and every phase of our existence.
And I just want to build on top of that. We also live in a world with social media and where everyone is only portraying a slice of reality. And often when we're suffering and we are experiencing real, genuine pain, and, for example, one of our patients died, or I missed dinner with my family again tonight because I had to stay late at work, and we're dealing with all of these conflicts. And then we see that all of our colleagues seem to just be doing so well and everyone is thriving. Why aren't we doing well? Then we feel alone in our suffering. And that's a concept, emotional, pluralistic ignorance. We tend to overvalue how well other people are doing and undervalue how well we're doing. And we really need spaces, especially as physicians who to our patients really do have to portray some sense of stoicism. We have to just be on and be the best version of ourselves for them. We need places where we are not the best versions of ourselves and we can be real and vulnerable and talk about the, what's really going on in our lives.
Yeah. I mean, if I may add a quick point there, I mean, it's also the fear of missing out, right? I mean, the way information is portrayed, a lot of us constantly feel that, okay, I'm not doing that. I'm not going for the long walk. I'm not having the fancy TV or whatever it is. So, you're constantly relating to what somebody else has and what you may not have.
Yeah, I think that I liked your slice of reality analogy, Jordan. And I would add that media and social media exist to portray a fantastic slice of reality, whether it's fantastically good or fantastically bad. It's not portraying sort of where 95% of people have their existence, and we can become we could become confused by a sense of reality shift if we overindulge in that, and even when we're not overindulging personally, it's around us all the time.
I think we have to use it to expose that 95%. Sanj, I'm wondering, you alluded to the topic of the treadmill, the hedonic treadmill. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that a little further and just explain for the listeners, what does that mean? And how do we get off of the hedonic treadmill?
Yeah, when I read about hedonic adaptation, and I forget where I read, probably from Stoicism, but I was blown away because I was like, this is something that we should be learning in grade school.
Yeah.
This is something that every one of us who has kids should be teaching our kids. Basically, hedonic adaptation states that any stimuli in our lives that are constant will eventually be taken for granted. And this includes, big things and little things. So, as grateful and as joyful as having kids are initially, they'll eventually fade into the background. Same with our spouse, same with our new car, our job, our bank account, whatever it is. Temporary spike and then back to baseline. And there's a reason, because again, the mind wants us to be able to recognize new threats from old ones that are constant and should fade into the background of our lives. So that's the evolutionary reason behind hedonic adaptation. But it doesn't matter, whether it's evolutionary wiring or not, it's still a big problem if we want to improve and sustain well-being, right? if everything we do, we eventually adapt to, what's the point of doing anything, right? I mean, but fortunately, positive psychology has uncovered a roadmap, and I think you alluded to this roadmap of revamp last week's episode, Jordan, that can actually delay adaptation to positive events, can actually eliminate adaptation to big things that you want to really not take for granted. And the way to do this is to simply remember to pay attention to them. And you alluded to gratitude journaling last time, or 3 good things. But as Paul said, if we don't learn to pay attention to the whisper of the positive, we're going to be drowned out by the scream of the negative. And one of the ways to pay attention to the whisper is to cultivate attention to things that matter in your life and to make those habits. So 3 good things is a great way to start. Focusing on key inputs of your day that build upon remembering what matters to you. So, when I'm working from home or I'm off, I try to make it a point to take a walk with one of my kids every day that I'm there. It's a simple thing. It's like it's trivial almost to even say it out loud, right? But it makes me feel good, and it makes me connect. It builds that relationship, and it makes me remember, how good it is to have them living at home right now. It's a simple example of an input, but you can create, 2, 3, 4 inputs like that every day, and you can vary them so you don't adapt to them, which you will. But that's the key to avoiding hedonic adaptation, which I think everybody, especially physicians, with this whole arrival fallacy of, I'll be happy when, are very, very prone to it. I mean, we are problem solvers, and we are put our heads down, get the work done, and project ourselves to the next level in our life, and that's a recipe for dissatisfaction. To put it
I think you explain that and articulate it so well in your book, Sam, and you bring in the evidence for it from way back when with the Stoics, and it's really nice for the deep learner, I think. Then in the course, the simple story you told about the sushi dinners with your family just really bring the whole thing to reality. And what you start to realize is, I think there's more susceptibility to hedonic adaptation to those positive things than there are the negative things. And we can really just get caught up in that regard.
Yeah, that's another problem, is you adapt very quickly to the positive. To the things you don't want to adapt to, or you don't want to take for granted to, they're gone like that.
Yeah.
Right? To the negative things, the things that you would like to adapt to, the grief, the pitfalls, the setbacks, all of that, those take longer.
So you're still having the negativity screaming at you, and the positivity is quickly gone, right, in the whispers.
Yep.
And I think it's so interesting here, thinking, well, if we're all going to just adapt, then why bother doing any of this?
Yeah.
Because
that's what several physicians have told me when I work with them. Well, if we're going to adapt, what are we doing? Like, it's nihilism then, right? You're
exactly. And the idea is that we can actually change, that's set point. We were endowed with that. I joked last week, I came out of the womb a little more optimistic than, the average person. And we can all change where we lie and where we default back to by doing these intentional acts to cultivate well-being, by embracing positive interventions, by even just raising our awareness that, I do tend to be a little more grumpy than my colleagues. This is interesting. I'm curious about this. I think being curious to our own selves, our work systems that can really drive a lot of the burnout we experience as physicians is a really great way to approach, as many of you may be on this journey with us, bringing curiosity to yourself, to your environment, to things you've been doing for years, because it's in those moments that we can really change our approach to the way we've always lived the world, and relearn and relearn good behaviors and unlearn some of the ways we've adapted thus far. I don't think we're destined to stay at that set point.
Right. I mean, I think you bring up a great point. I mean, I've been reading lately about this concept of cognitive rigidity, right? I mean, as we age, we lose the childlike brain, which is so adaptable and flexible, and we end up in this set pattern, if you will call it, and then it's hard to unlearn that, if that's a good analogy.
And not impossible. We can always embrace that beginner's mind and try to imagine, what if I didn't have this information? What if I walked into this clinic that I walk into every day and sat down at my desk as though I had never been there before? And what would my day look like if I acted as though this was not something that I did every day for the last 15 years?
Right.
What's something new that I would see? What new in my environment would I appreciate? And that's essentially the essence of mindfulness.
Yeah, that's key. And for physicians, we do repetitive tasks, and I'm probably the king of repetitive tasks because I basically read films every day, right? So every day it's 100 to 150 cases on the work list, and by introducing novelty, which is what you're talking about, introducing novelty into your day, into your routine experience. You prevent adaptation, you prevent boredom, and you actually improve and increase engagement, which is really ultimately what we're all after. We all want to feel alive, immersed in what we're doing, in the zone, flow. We talk about all that stuff in the course, but these anchoring questions. What great pickup am I gonna make today? Who am I gonna help today? It sounds really corny, but it really brings you back to the case, or relating the demographic of the CT scan to somebody in your family or somebody oh, this is my aunt's age, and reading it as if you'd be reading your aunt's images, really put meaning behind what you're doing, and every specialty can do this. Believe me, if radiology can do it and provide meaning, that every specialty can do this. So I think that's a great point. Curiosity, intentional introduction of novelty, and insight into our evolutionary wiring, which is not, which may be hard to untangle, but just the insight of it alone can provide distance from it, and we don't have to be tied to it. We can just observe it. Oh, there I go again. I'm looking for fire. I'm searching for food, right? So that I think is just key, and I think that's one of the things that I'm really proud of ThriveRx is it gives us the ability to gain this insight and awareness into some of these pitfalls that otherwise you just kind of go on autopilot, and you wonder. You just do the same thing over and over again. You bang your head against the wall, and you don't really get anywhere.
Right. One of the topics that comes up often is that you become aware, you improve, but then you slowly drift back to your set point. So often you get this question of how do you keep going and keep gaining that momentum, that you're not setting back to your old self, or old standard. Once again, I don't know what you think about that.
One of my dearest friends, and he's a very well-known psychologist and host of the psychology podcast, Scott Barry Kaufman, in his most recent book, Transcend, he has a quote, and it says, "Life is not a video game. It's not just about going forward from level to level. Often it's a 2-step forward, 1-step back process. It's a 2 steps back, 1 step forward process." And I think we all know that very well. And I think just recognizing life is not a video game. It's not just about getting to the next level. It's about being okay with where we are and being okay with not being okay where we are. And I think that is something to really hold on to, that we are human beings, not human doings, right? So I think on that note, it might be time for us to wrap up.
Yeah, well, that's great discussion today, guys. Thank you. And
thank you.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next Tuesday, 8:15, ThriveRx. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.